In the early hours of December 24th, 2025, as the Dnipro Delta sank into a dense, heavy darkness, the water so flat that any disturbance left a mark. For nearly 2 hours from the eastern bank, 8 to 12 assault rubber boats departed in sequence. Their outboard motors throttled down to the lowest setting so as not to break the water's rhythm. On each boat were 6 to 10 Russian soldiers, nearly a company in total, most likely airborne troops or naval infantry, carrying out a short mission. Cross the channel, seize a small high bank, hold until the light thinned to open a bridgehead. They bet on darkness and the tangled canal network to swallow their traces. But on the opposite bank, Ukrainian defenders did not need to see the boats. They had already read the water's rhythm. When illumination rounds went up, the river turned into a mirror, and the crossing fell instantly into a kill zone. Russia did not cross to probe, and they crossed to plant a bridgehead. Roughly 60 to 90 troops split into 3 boat clusters planned to touch down on a strip of ground just high enough to emplace gun positions, hold until the light thinned, then pull more men and ammunition across. On the departure bank, Pecam Pecheneg 7.62mm machine guns were already set, several RPG-7 tubes laid out along covering fire arcs. Jamming was not kept on continuously, only brief pulses, timed precisely, enough to make UAV signals flicker for a few beats as the boats slipped through narrow sections. What they did not see was how the other side was reading. Not reading people. Reading the water's rhythm. Repeating disturbances at choke points, wave traces running with unnatural regularity, patches of stillness in exactly the right places. Thermal camera UAVs hung low, not hunting targets, only holding a view and letting the formation tighten itself. The rule was simple. Do not fire while the boats are still spread. Only when the channel forces them into single file, when turning back means colliding, when every option collapses into one direction. Only then, strike. Ukraine's plan was not on a map. It lived in rhythm. Break the rhythm first to make the formation hesitate. Compress it afterward with light. And when the water no longer has anywhere dark, lock it down with indirect fire. In the Delta, that was not a reaction. It was a trap already locked, waiting for the boats to drift in on their own. Just before 0200 hours on the morning of December 24th, as the Russian formation slid into the first canal section, the river lay unnaturally still, the kind of stillness of a space already measured. 3 boat clusters, 8 to 12 craft in total, held low speed, 20 to 30 meters apart. Outboard motors throttled down to a low, dull hum clinging to the surface. On the boats, 60 to 90 soldiers sat pressed tight, weapons held low, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. The formation drifted evenly, unhurried, with the rhythm of a crossing that believed itself unseen. But Ukraine did not wait to see. Underwater acoustic sensors had already caught the abnormally steady propeller cadence, a rhythm that did not belong to the current. Above, a low-hovering thermal camera UAV held a single fixed frame, not chasing, not hunting. It simply stayed still and let the heat trails enter on their own. The 3 clusters, still dispersed when they left the bank, began to compress as the channel narrowed. The 20 to 30 meter gaps closed beat by beat as if squeezed from both sides. At the bend, the lead boat was forced to slow, and here, turning back was almost the same as colliding. The decision was triggered at exactly that moment. Illumination rounds from 120mm mortars blossomed overhead, hanging white in the sky. The lead boat gunned the throttle by reflex, but the light had already done the most important thing, turned the river into a readable plain. From that point on, every wake was no longer a faint trace. It was an arrow pointing straight into the formation itself, and once under the light, no misstep ahead had anywhere left to dissolve. The illumination had barely stabilized when the river changed roles at once, no longer darkness to hide in, but a white plain laying bare every movement. The 3 Russian boat clusters, 8 to 12 craft in total, were forced together by the channel. Gaps of 20 to 30 meters collapsed to 10, then 5, within just a few beats of the water. The lead boat gunned the throttle by reflex to escape the light, but at the bend it was forced to ease off. The one behind braked hard. The next slipped sideways. The whole column compressed solid, as if pressed into a mold. On this narrow channel, turning back was no longer an option. It was a collision. From the departure bank, PKM/Pecheneg 7.62mm guns spat a few covering bursts. RPG-7 rounds swept the night like a late reassurance. But what choked the formation was not shore fire, it was the rhythm already broken in the bend. Radio traffic thickened as everyone called out to avoid ramming, and at the exact moment silence mattered most, the jamming point on the bank pulsed hard for 30 to 60 seconds. Signals flickered. Orders arrived half a beat late. Reflex stacked on reflex. The formation was no longer controlled, only trying not to crash. In Ukraine's frame, this was no longer a river-crossing thrust. It was a problem whose solution had already shown itself. A low-hovering thermal camera UAV held a fixed frame. Underwater acoustic sensors read the abnormally steady propeller cadence. The 3 boat clusters were compressing on their own, and in the middle was one craft carrying more men, the rhythm keeper, the communications node. The decision was pressed. Do not fire wide. Cut the rhythm. The first FPV drove in, driving straight into the lead boat just before the narrowest section. No big blast was needed, only a half-second deflection of the bow. That half-second was enough for the following boat to nearly ram, the third to ride the wake to evade, the fourth to drift into the muddy bank. The channel locked solid. Immediately after, the second FPV struck the rhythm-keeping boat in the middle. The first thing to unravel was not the water, but coordination. With contact lost at point-blank range, the formation collapsed fast. Soldiers jumped onto the muddy bank by instinct to avoid collision, to avoid detonation. But under thermal cameras, the mud bank hid no one. It only made people more stationary and brighter. At that moment, indirect fire stepped in to close the door. No prolonged rain of shells, just a few salvos placed exactly. 120mm mortars covered the bank edge, pinning everyone into the mud. 155mm artillery blocked the channel behind, cutting the retreat. The formation was trapped in a suffocating state. Stop and be locked down, move, and only compress faster. Under illumination, every wake became a targeting line, and every burst of throttle only made that arrow burn brighter. After the rhythm cut, Ukraine did not accelerate. They deliberately stretched time because on open water, time itself is the fastest eroding force. Between 0200 and 0208, illumination was kept at a steady cadence, enough to hold the river permanently open, never allowing darkness to return and hide any movement. Under that suspended light, even the smallest ripples could no longer be ignored. On the low-hovering UAV's thermal feed, heat signatures began to coalesce into 3 to 4 clusters, centered around 1 to 2 boats still afloat and still running, because that is the natural reflex when a formation loses order. Cling to what still works, gather people together to retain warmth and morale, and wait for a clearer command. But with every passing minute, those clusters only became more stationary, denser, and easier to read, like dots steadily darkening themselves on a screen. On the Russian side, they tried to keep a lifeline going with familiar, time-consuming drills. 1 to 2 boats were pushed forward as towboats, ropes thrown across in the stark white light. PKM's Pecheneg 7.62mm fire from the bank spat a few more short bursts for cover, while smoke was released onto the water to carve out a fragile breathing space. But smoke does not stand still. Wind tore it into thin bands, thinning it quickly, and under illumination it hid no one, only exposed the direction of their attempted withdrawal, like yet another arrow drawing itself across the river's surface. Jamming continued to pulse, but the cost was commands arriving another beat late, while the water kept recording every throttle burst, every bow turn, every desperate effort like chalk marks that could not be erased. In the following minutes, once the heat clusters had settled into clear points of concentration, Ukraine pressed the final blow according to the logic of a trap already closed. They did not. Individual boats did not hunt panicked targets, but struck directly at the ability to rescue one another. One FPV dived in, aiming straight at the boat, trying to tow another out of the choke point. Merely stopping it, slewing its bow, or killing its engine was enough to collapse the entire recovery effort within seconds. Immediately after, 120mm mortars ringed the bank edge, so no position could be held for long, while 155mm artillery, M777 or Caesar type, blocked the channel behind with 2 to 3 short salvos, making the retreat vanish in the most literal sense, not hard to withdraw, but no longer existing at all. From that moment on, the crossing no longer unfolded by minutes, but by states. Burning boats drifted slowly with the current, needing no one to push them. People were caught between mud and water, and each time they tried to gather themselves to pull someone free, the thermal screen showed that cluster growing brighter, clearer, easier to lock. The light did not need to intensify. The river had completed its role. It held everything exactly where it was long enough until no rhythm remained that could lead to the far bank. As the illumination thinned and the explosions receded, what remained over the delta was not a loud victory, but a new state. The stretch of channel where the Russian formation had been broken became a continuously monitored point. Any unusual disturbance appearing afterward was read from its very first beat. For Russia, the loss was not limited to a few boats destroyed or the number of men who failed to reach the far bank, but to the night window that had been lost. A river crossing thrust stopped in the opening minutes usually triggers a chain reaction. The next attempt must carry more smoke, stronger jamming, earlier covering fire, and those very measures enlarge the signature, expose it sooner. For Ukraine, the cost was not measured in the number of rounds fired, but in maintaining an unbroken observation decision strike loop for several minutes without losing rhythm. On open water, what decides is not the heaviest firepower, but the ability to turn a small movement into an irreversible reaction. A night river crossing rarely fails for lack of resolve. It fails when the rhythm is read in advance, and every option is forced into the narrowest segment. In the delta, water hides no one. It only reflects those who fall out of rhythm. When illumination comes up, the maze of channels is no longer a place to disappear, but a plane where every deviation is magnified. That night, there was no single shot that decided everything. There was only a sequence of actions pressed at the right moments, sustained long enough and cold enough to turn a river crossing into a problem with no remaining solution. And the question left for next time is not whether to cross or not, but this: when the opponent has learned to turn the water into a screen, does any true darkness still exist?